All right, so you guys should have done your warm-up for today. If you have any questions on it, we can talk about that tomorrow when I am back. But what we're going to move into is we're going to move into Chapter 7, which is basically all about percents. So before we actually start doing some calculations with percents, it's going to be important for us to move between fractions and decimals and percents and between all three of them. So we're actually going to do lesson 7.2 today, just because it's a little bit easier, and then we'll do 7.1 tomorrow when I'm back. And today we're going to focus just on decimals and percents is what we're going to be taking a look at. So our first thing that we're going to look at is we're going to take a look at how do I change from a percent to a decimal. So I'm going to give you a percent and you're going to write it into a decimal. And there's really only one step to it. All you're going to do is divide by 100. And we're going to learn why that is tomorrow. So just for right now, just know that to change from a percent to a decimal, we're going to divide by 100. So we're going to do the example, and then I'm going to show you a shortcut that some of you guys might already know. So I'm going to write down 16 over 100, and then we're going to divide. And 16 divided by 100, if you do that on your calculator, is 0.16. Or again, if you just did 0.16, it's totally fine. So some of you guys may remember as soon as we wrote down that example, you're like, oh yeah, I remember there's a shortcut for it. The shortcut that you can use is you can move the decimal point 2 places to the left. So if we're going from a percent to a decimal, we're going to think about moving our decimal point 2 places to the left. That technically is the same thing as dividing by 100. It's just a shortcut. When we do our examples today, we're going to use the shortcut, but let's say you forget how to use the shortcut. This step here will always get you to the correct answer. So let's take a look at some examples. In example A, there is no decimal point in this one. So when there is no decimal point given, that means the decimal point starts after the number and we go 2 places to the left. So 9% is the same thing as 0.09. Or again, if you just did 0.09, I'm totally okay with that as long as I can see the decimal points. One thing you'll notice, my answer does not have a percent sign because a percent and a decimal, these two are equivalent to each other. The difference is one has a percent, the one with the decimal does not. Example B, decimal point starts after the number because there's not one given in it, and we're going to go 2 places to the left. So this one, 78%, is the same thing as 0.78 or 78 hundredths. Example C already has a decimal point, so we're still going to move it 2 places to the left. So 1, 2, so this one is 0.007. Excuse me. If you guys have questions so far, pause the video, see if you can help each other out. Otherwise, we're going to keep going. On example D, again, no decimal point is given, so it's going to start at the end of the number. And again, it only moves 2 places. Some students are just in the habit of moving it to the front of the number, but you have to physically move it 2 places because this one becomes 5.37. Likewise on E, decimal point starts after the number, moving it 2 places to the left, so this one's going to be 1.26. Again, the important thing is always to move it 2 times. No more, no less. In example F, we already have the decimal point, so you're moving it 2 places to the left, so it becomes 0.019. And again, I'm putting this 0 in because when we hopped over a blank space, so that blank space needs a 0 in it. If you guys have questions, help each other out, so that way you can answer more questions that are similar to this. Now, because we just went from a percent to a decimal, I need to be able to go the other direction as well. If we're changing from a decimal to a percent, here's our step. We multiply by 100. So both things that we're doing have to do with 100. It's just remembering, when do you divide, when do you multiply? Going from a decimal to a percent, we always want to get bigger, so that's why we are multiplying. On the other one, we were getting smaller, so that's why we were dividing. But it's okay, you guys. I'm going to show you guys a shortcut and a way to remember your shortcut after these examples that we take a look at, and that'll help you to kind of keep them straight. When do you multiply, when do you divide? How do you use the shortcuts that we use? So multiplying by 100. So I want you guys in your calculator, even if you think you know the shortcut, you're going to take that decimal, which doesn't have a percent sign, and you're going to times by 100. And when you do that, you should get 20%. And when you type it into your calculator, you're not going to get the percent sign. But because you're going from a decimal to a percent, your answer has to have a percent on it. Now this is going to sound really nitpicky, and normally I'm not a nitpicky teacher, but this one I have to be. When you're asked to change from a decimal to a percent, your answer must have a percent sign on it. If it doesn't, I am going to mark it wrong on your homework, because the number 20 and 20% are two very different numbers. So anytime you're changing to a percent, your answer has to have a percent sign on it. Now let's take a look at finding our shortcut. Again, some of you guys, maybe as soon as we did the example, you're like, oh yeah, I remember how to do that shortcut. Those of you that didn't see it, let's write it down. So the shortcut, when you're going from a decimal to a percent, you're going to move the decimal point, still two places, but instead of going to the left, now we're going to go to the right. And again, think about moving to the right because your number needs to get bigger. And again, I'll show you a shortcut or a way to remember the shortcuts that we've been doing. When do you move left? When do you move right? Or maybe you're like me sometimes and you forget your lefts and rights. So I'll show you kind of putting both the shortcuts together and how you can keep them straight. So let's take a look at some examples. The directions tell us to write each decimal as a percent. So this tells me every single one of these needs to have a percent sign on it. And our shortcut tells us that we move two places to the right. So my decimal point is between the 3 and the 8. Two places to the right is 384%. Example B, already a decimal point, two places to the left. Now, you don't have to write all the zeros in front of it. If you just write 0.5 or 0.5, that's totally fine. These other zeros here that come in front of that are just placeholders. So any zeros that come in front of the decimal point, you don't need to write. But I am missing one thing. I need the percent sign. Example C, two places to the right. So this one becomes 1%. I would like, first of all, if you guys have any questions on A through C, help each other out. When you're ready, I want you guys to do D, E, and F. I'll write them down. You guys check to see if you agree. All right, on example D, you should have ended up with 391%. In example E, you should have ended up with 0.2% or 0.2%. And in example F, you should have ended up with 91%. As I was writing down these examples, I wanted to remind you guys again, you always move it exactly two places to the right. Does not mean the decimal point automatically goes at the end of the number, as in examples B and E. Notice the decimal point comes in front because that's the number that I picked on it. Okay? So just be careful. Make sure you're always moving it exactly 2 places. And this is really helpful to show these little hops in here. All right, so let's think about our shortcut. We talked about decimals, we talked about percents. I think of Dr. Pepper when I think about moving between decimals and percents. And I think about Dr. Pepper because I think about that doctor starts with a D, P starts with, or the P in pepper matches up with percents. So here's our shortcut. We said if we're going from decimals to percents, like we just practiced, we're moving to the right 2 places. So take a look in Dr. Pepper. When I go from a D to a P, I'm moving to the right in the word. So that'll help you to remember if I'm going from a decimal, think D decimal, P percent, we're moving to the right in that phrase. But if I'm doing percent to decimal, for this one, we're moving to the left 2 places. So if I look at, if I'm going from a percent, now I'm starting at the P, going to the D for doctor, I have to move left in the word to put those in the same order. Some students this really clicks with and really helps them to remember. Other students, they struggle with it a little bit. If it doesn't work, it's fine. Then you'll just have to remember the multiplying and dividing by 100 or some other way to do it. But again, if you're starting with a D, moving to a P, you moved to the right in the word. If you're starting with the P, moving to the D, you're moving to the left. So you move left with your decimal point. So that's how Dr. Pepper can help you. All right, we're going to take a look at a couple real-world examples on what's the importance of being able to change between decimals and percents. Okay? So in an online survey, we found that 1/5 of teenagers said that their favorite way to communicate with friends is by Snapchat. 21% preferred using Twitter, and 0.15 favored texting. Which of these groups is the largest? Now, it's hard to compare these groups because one group is given as a fraction, one group is given as a percent, and another group is given as a decimal. So just like when we compare fractions and decimals, we can't really compare them until they're in the same unit or the same type of number. So we need to make sure that all 3 of these are written in a similar way for us to compare them. Easiest way is we're going to change them all to decimals. And we can compare decimals like we did on our weekly review quizzes the last 2 weeks. So let's first start talking about our teenagers who like to communicate via Snapchat. It says that 1/5 of teenagers said their favorite way to communicate was by Snapchat. So 1/5. How do I turn a fraction into a decimal? Again, hopefully you know this. This was on your last weekly review quiz. You're going to divide, and you can use a calculator for this. You're going to take 1 divided by 5, which is 0.2, and I'm going to put all of them to 2 decimal places. So I'm going to fill that in with a 0. All right, moving on to our next type. Kids also like to communicate via Twitter. And this one was 21%. And I'm going to change that into a decimal. Now I want you guys to watch on how I'm going to use that Dr. Pepper thing to help us. So Dr. Pepper, I'm just going to say Dr. P. That's how we would write it out. I'm going to go from a percent to a decimal. So I'm going from the P to the D. So this tells me I'm moving my decimal point to the left 2 places. So I'm going to take the decimal point into the end and go 1, 2. So this is really 0.21. The same thing as 21%. Then the last one, they surveyed and they found some kids enjoyed texting. And that one was already given as a decimal. So there's nothing we need to do to change it at all. And then we're going to look to see which of these decimals is the biggest. And taking a look at them, biggest is going to be our Twitter account, or our Twitter way of communicating. So Twitter is the largest group of teenagers, is the largest way that teenagers in this survey enjoyed communicating. If you have questions, help each other out, see if you can help each other understand this. All right, let's take a look at one more example. At this one it says, at a restaurant, 1/8 of customers prefer fish sandwiches, 14% prefer rib sandwiches, and 0.12 prefer chicken sandwiches. Which of these groups is the largest? So again, I'm giving you a fraction, a percent, and a decimal. We need to put them all into decimals in order for us to compare them. Let's start with our fish sandwiches. 1/8 of people liked the fish sandwich. How do I change a fraction into a decimal? By dividing. 1 divided by 8 is, I have to look at my answer key. Oh yeah, 0.125. And I'm just going to write down the whole decimal point that is given to me because it ends pretty short. Now let's take a look at our percent, our rib sandwiches. And that was 14%. Now again, I'm changing a percent into a decimal, so I want to think about Dr. Pepper. I'm going from a percent to a decimal, so I'm moving 2 places to the left. Here's my decimal point, 1, 2. So 14% is the same thing as 0.14. And last but not least, they tell us that 0.12 people prefer the chicken sandwich, which again is already a decimal, so I can just leave it. And then we look at all 3 of these, and the biggest is our rib sandwiches. Just happened to be how I picked them for this one. Will not always be the percent, but it just happens to be that one for these ones. But this one, our rib, gives us our highest decimal point. So that is the group that's the largest. All right, here's your homework assignment due for tomorrow at the start of class. It is a little bit longer than I would normally give you for a homework assignment. I think it's like 24 questions. But I wanted you guys to get a lot of practice with going between decimals and percents. So make sure that you are moving the decimal point correctly with them. And also it's a longer assignment because I know that they don't take very long to do. Okay? So you guys have the rest of the hour to work. I expect that you guys are quietly working, and I come back tomorrow with amazing reports from you guys. Have a great rest of your day.